spent generations designing systems to teach people answers. And for a long time, that made sense because access to knowledge was limited. But that's no longer the world we're living in. Today, a student can sit in a classroom with AI open in front of them, with access to more information than any teacher could ever hold. And so it's raising a much bigger question, and one that arguably goes beyond education. If answers are now abundant, what are we actually teaching? And maybe even more importantly, what should we be teaching instead? Now, that's what I want to explore today. And to do so, I'm joined by my special guest, Noopur Joshi. And Noopur has lived this shift from multiple angles. She is an architect, she's an educator, a curriculum designer, and a yoga teacher to boot. And now she works at the intersection of AI and learning. Noopur, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Darshi. I'm so glad you have me here. And I'm very excited to speak and share my experiences.
I love this. I'm so looking forward to this conversation because, Noopur, you've not only designed spaces, you've designed thinking across sectors, across industries and age ranges. And as an educator, I really wanted to just start by asking you, what is it like to be in a classroom where everyone seems to have all the answers in front of them?
To be honest, when I first faced this in a classroom, I was very taken aback, kind of an ego hit, because suddenly the hierarchy of what a teacher-student is shifted. So it's no longer me transmitting education or knowledge. It was more like answering the difficult questions and navigating conversations that I probably didn't have answers to. And when you have students looking up to you for the right answers and you don't have them, you kind of are put on a spot. So even though students know that they're sitting with AI or they have the technology or the knowledge, that older expectation that the teacher still knows better is there. And then you can't meet up to that. And that puts you on the spot sometimes. And I've had that experience.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. So actually, it starts to build this almost insecurity of being able to beat the AI and prove the student that you know more. But how has that then started to shift now that it's becoming norm? And I suppose how is your approach changed now?
I think for me, when a situation like this comes up and the student asks me a question that I don't have a direct answer to, I lead it with another question. But for me, the more important thing is to also break the mindset of the student and shift it to saying, I don't have all the answers and I'm not sure to give you all the answers. I'm here to navigate with you, explore with you, and there are some things that you might know better than me. So there was a student in one of my class who I was teaching branding and logo design to in one of the classes. And the student came and shared her own experience of developing a logo for a product that she was selling at a fair. And he shared more than what I shared in the presentation. And I said, that's great. For a second, I was like, okay, she knows more than I do. But then I said, why don't you share this with the class? And why don't you let everybody benefit from your experience? And I feel like that is how the role of the teacher is shifting now. It's not about holding all the reins. It's about knowing when to let them go and how to navigate that conversation with confidence.
And then for students then, now that they can access those answers so instantly, what is becoming the skill for them? Because all I know of education and how I made my way successfully through the system was rote learning, was really being able to memorize and hold a lot of information, be able to repeat it in an exam setting. How is that shifting now?
I think students are, and I'm actively already seeing this, a lot of students are approaching things from a problem-solving point of view. So now that they have all the information, they want to solve problems that challenge them. And I was just sharing with a friend the other day that a student in the school was actually trying to was learning something about urban farming on his own, took an off-road from the main curriculum and proposed an urban farm on the rooftop of the school. Now, the solution is pretty straightforward. You would probably think you take a patch on this roof and then you grow the urban farm. But the real struggle that the student had to go through was how do you then convince the system? How do you convince the teachers, the stakeholders, and actually get the job done? So I think we're slowly moving from knowing the answers or finding the answers to how do you solve real life problems and make a change. And that, to me, AI won't be able to catch up anytime soon, because real life circumstances would be so different. Getting people to change their minds and take action, and if you're able to do that with the help of AI in a faster way, I think that would be a win.
Okay, so I want to dig into this a bit because I'm also shifting my own. It's hard to not have my own experiences of the education system and also my own experiences of my kids. I've got young children who are in school, and I'm constantly thinking, I'm quite surprised at how similar the things that they're learning and the way that they're learning is to how I did so many years ago, despite AI being started to be integrated into the classroom. We still haven't moved beyond just grappling with the fact that it's a new thing. But what I just heard from you in that urban planning example is actually one, the problem and the sort of the underlying questions that's going to be that is being asked of those children or of those students in the classroom is very different. It's suddenly real world application. And we know for generations that sometimes education has been accused of not preparing us for the real world. But it's also it's suddenly asking quite a lot of people to say, okay, you think you've got this. Now go out into the world. This is the world of work that certainly I operate in, managing stakeholders, figuring out and understanding how you're going to get there. How close are we to actually making this kind of thing mainstream? And actually then, what role does AI play in this, and how is it going to be able to elevate as well as maintain the core things that young people's brains need and all of us need as in order to build up our skills and resilience going forward?
So I think there are a few questions wrapped up in that. And let me just, if I'm understanding it right, how does learning evolve with AI? If you're going to say it's all going to be about problem solving. So let me tackle that first and say that learning for the longest time was about getting the skills to then apply into real world problems that are economically viable. So not all skills are equally economically, favorable. So somebody studying sustainable design, wanting to do good for the birds and plants, was not necessarily as well paid as somebody who's in finance and contributes towards the economy. So now that thing is going to shift, because what skills we are going to value is going to change. Skills that we've seen were more and we're seeing that, and it's drastically different. And I don't know what to expect coming forward. It's just that the things that the AI companies are choosing to focus on are the skills that you'll see getting automated sooner. So the first thing they focused on was coding, and it was the most valued skill and went down to being not so valued. And then they moved towards healthcare, and then they're moving towards finance and law and all of these things. So we don't know which industry is going to come next. But my point is that what stays at the underlying of learning itself is cognitive development. And if we just have to think about that, we need to apply the cognitive learning irrespective of the field. So the basic understanding of how thought processes work, first principle thinking, design thinking, iterative thinking, is irrespective of the field you apply it to. And moving forward, what I see how the workforce shifting is people are going to move from being attached to one company and one skill set to shifting over a few or maybe even plenty of companies and skill sets over their career. So what would stay at the baseline is how do you approach a problem? How do you take the steps to solve it? And what are the things that you keep in your control and the human thinking control versus what you choose to automate? And that would completely vary from field to field, from task to task. That judgment and discernment is what we will have to teach the kid moving forward. Because ultimately, the real life consequences is what you will have to face, not AI. So even if AI gives you judgment, it will be your own discernment that will help you navigate through that complexity.
Yes, certainly comes up in my world, and it's in the corporate world that yes, AI can give you the answers, but you're going to have to own the outcome, and the accountability still sits with the person delivering answers. And it strikes me, and as something that I suppose I was touching on in that introduction, is that our focus has always been on teaching people how to get to answers. And I'm hearing like there's a step beneath that, and that is teaching people how to think almost. And that AI has created some challenges and pillars by which the discernment piece, the critical thinking piece can all slot in. But that is the bit that for now, and as you say, we don't know which is the next thing that AI is coming after. But for now, that does seem to be that core area that if you develop that, then not only do you get to use it, but I suppose a corollary as well feels like an increased resilience or an ability to then adapt more quickly to change that starts to accelerate as well with all of this. And so then, can we hone in a little bit on the judgment? And of course, bias is very central to the stories and the questions that we explore in this podcast. And actually, many of your insights you're sharing really cross over from the classroom to the boardroom. And we're seeing now much more having to really think, hang on, why have we been teaching all of this for so long? And actually, the way that we can make it real is putting it into that real world. Now, I sometimes find that I use AI to help me interrogate my thinking. I can use it in a sort of metacognitive way. I will use it as that thinking partner, testing stuff and things like that. And I'm curious as to what your views are on that and how actually you use AI to help you, whether in life or in particular in the classroom and teaching others. And perhaps we start there, but I'd also really like to think about how we approach judging AI, particularly for young minds that are coming. And it's much easier for me. I've had a lifetime. I've had good 40 years of figuring out what I think about things, what I think about myself, where I'm placed in relation to them. But we know that there is a lot of bias that gets embedded in AI, or that AI will produce very fancy and confident looking answers that may not be truthful. And so the flow on from that is how are we making sure that we're not allowing people to reinforce biases faster, but to actually use AI, as that thinking tool, but also as a form of supporting critical thinking. Thoughts
No,
on a postcard?
I think there are a few things here. I feel, first of all, the data that is fed to train these LLMs is bias in itself. Who is using and who is developing these tools is heavily a very small section of the society that is a misrepresentation of the world. It won't represent the sections of the society which would have a very different life experience, which come from a very different historical cultural background. And if they don't have representation, AI can't customize for them or personalize for them. So then so in that way, it does hold that bias based on who trains it. And we simply see from statistics that just more men using AI versus more or lesser women using AI, we see that the answers are more skewed towards the way men think or process life or decisions versus how women do it. And that's a very simple contrast. But then there are so many nuances to it, from the region to the culture. And if we start to do that, that is inherently going to be there. But there was another question that you asked about how we develop that layer of judgment on how you judge what AI is giving you. And which I feel to me is also a very concerning thing, because just a few days back in Straits Times, there was a report that 8-year-olds are now in Singapore, are almost 52% of them use AI, which kind of is alarming for me, because I feel that's the age, that's the formative age in which when we ask questions, when we interact with our peers, is when we understand ourselves. So the interaction is not so much about really knowledge transfer, but navigating human interactions. How do you resolve conflicts? How do you build relationships? And a lot of those things that happen during that age, and even moving on like into their adolescence and teenage, is when you are stuck with something and you reach out for help and you seek that help, you build that bond. But if tomorrow we are going to replace these things with AI because that's the easy way out, there is lesser embarrassment, you get the right answer right away, and you don't build that bond in the process of finding out that answer, or you're navigating an emotional issue at like a bullying in school and you're trying to seek help, you don't do that. But what happens in that process is you miss out on that big section of the human connection, and in that process and fail to develop your own personality and opinion. Because if you just keep interacting with technology, or technology becomes the primary source of information for you, then you kind of are only feeding yourself with diplomatic answers or sort of the sugar-coated way, somebody who reaffirms your own beliefs when they need to be questioned in a way. So all of these things is something that is alarming for me as well. And I would think of how, or at least the policymakers should be thinking of how we regulate it, especially for certain age groups. I don't think anybody has the answer yet. I don't think any government has the answer yet. The technology is moving too fast. But we need to think about these questions in time.
Just the image of an 8-year-old or being in that classroom where the 8-year-old is parroting something from AI, and as a teacher you're trying to ask them, but what do you think about that? Why do you think that? And pushing it. And knowing what I know about how early and we are in it and how fast it is moving, even in the workplace, that there is this fear of going against the AI sometimes. For developing minds, it's a real catch-22, because yes, on the one hand, it can help you to think, but on the other hand, if you bring it in too early, then you're not allowing that judgment piece to develop first. And you're right, this is a bigger question than you or I, and it's one that sits above our head. And you raise actually an interesting or an extra layer to what's happening in the world generally. I'm seeing much more of a movement to think about smartphones for children and social media for children, where there should be an age there. And AI somehow can slip under the net as not quite having the same danger markings, because one, it's so new, and one, it has so much potential for great things as well. But even then, we are seeing much more of these instances where adolescents have been using AI, or there are certainly lawsuits happening now where they've ended up, or have had suicide cases or really tragic or traumatic instances that have been aided by AI. And it still comes back to what are your thoughts on where to start with nudging that 8-year-old out of that AI bubble? Because again, we just see something that's come from a machine as truth. And you touched on this point about losing that human connection, or all of us having that primary school teacher that actually could have changed the course of our lives because they saw something in us that maybe our parents might have been worried that we're not getting the maths and the English grades, and they could see something else and could encourage us and tell you that they believed in you. And it's the first non-parental figure that you have that does this. A question or something that I've been pondering on lately is, our world is so geared to logic, typically a male logic is right, and we must all do it and go and follow a particular path. And when it comes to gender equality, it's long been this battle of, women they're a bit emotional and they're a bit this or that, and that is somehow contrary to true logic. But I'm wondering whether that human element, the real human emotional logic that runs counter to mathematics, to algorithms, to large language models, is something that we should be given more space to lean into, particularly as kids. What are your thoughts on that?
I think this reminds me of the book Thinking Fast and Slow, in which he says that we think fast when we come from a place of intuition and we've already experienced certain there is an experience we've had multiple times, and now that comes out faster. And versus when we encounter something new and that's not familiar, we think slow, we try to break it down, and there's a pause. And the brain actually switches from fast to slow depending on how we gauge the problem. So it's this thing about logical thinking and intuition, and they're two sides of the same coin. So you develop the intuition over repeating a certain logical thinking over a long period of time, and then you just understand that this is how it would be. Sometimes you don't have it comes before the logical reasoning. And sometimes when the problem is too dense, you then sit back and logic it out with yourself and with parameters. So when you use the word pause, I felt like that is what we need to incorporate. We need to incorporate the pause and let our kids be comfortable, or develop the skill of sitting with a pause and then deciding what they want to do, whether they want to switch between fast or slow thinking. And some problems need slow thinking. They don't have to be rushed. And what is happening with AI is we are bypassing this completely and jumping into AI. And especially when AI is done without guardrails, without supervision, without regulation. And that is the risk we run about having AI completely undermine cognitive development and probably even hinder it in ways when it's used in education. But the same AI, when used within certain regulated parameters under adult supervision, with the right steps and including that pause when you really know why you're using the tool for, and the limitations of the tool as well as its strengths, that is when it can augment thinking. But that guardrail, that policy regulation has to be in place. Now, if you just think about it, countries that have easy access or at least the infrastructure to use AI, and these are mostly developed countries, USA, Singapore, Japan, South Korea, some countries in Europe who have the infrastructure and can include AI in their curriculums, are possibly thinking about policies, are possibly thinking about how we can use these guardrails. But then there is a huge chunk of countries which does not have access to technology, which does not have access to... So the government's first concern is going to be, how do we give them access? And the gap between giving them access to actually building the policy, that is where a lot of cognitive loss could happen, because before it is regulated, it is in the hands of these kids who then start depending on it too much, too quickly, and there is nobody to supervise it. So I feel if we are trying to bring equality and equity with AI in education, if it's not done correctly, it can actually increase the gaps between an educated society and a developed society and a developing society.
How early can we start teaching that thinking, judgment piece, given the race that we're in to the bottom of getting ahead of these kids getting AI? What are your thoughts on that?
I think definitely controlling or at least supervising the usage of technology, I think it's becoming more challenging for parents. And I see it in my own child struggling. And sometimes you just give in because for whatever reason, it's you don't have the time or you don't have the bandwidth. But I think it's extremely important to at least be aware of the things that they're using, have these child locks and things like that in place. But I feel like it's going to become very hard for parents to also keep an eye on their kids all of the time. So I do see this as a real concern. But as far as possible, sit with your child. Times when they want the device, want to use it, sit with them and ask them, have you tried to solve this on your own? Where is it that you're stuck? What exactly is it that you're going to use AI for? And what is the expected answer? What do you think would be the answer? And how are you going to benchmark the answer if it's wrong or right? So asking a few questions before they directly jump into answering, set an expectation with them and say, do you have the ability, or do you have some benchmark to say that, this AI is leading you in the right way or not? And I feel like these conversations are going to be difficult, but we will have to make time for them if AI has to be effective.
I agree. It's something that certainly as a parent, is our constant sort of journey, particularly where it's new for us all. And so we're also learning at the same time for ourselves as well as children.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I've always felt makes your profile and your experience so compelling, Noopur, is that you started out as an architect designing buildings, working urban planning, and then moved into designing courses for architecture, and then moved into learning, and now designing learning. And with that experience and that background and the arc you're going in, can you give us a potential sort of picture of what that future of education could look like? What if it was up to you? How would you be designing things now to support our young people and all of those learning for the first time how to operate in this new world and the skills that we need?
I think for me, what has been the biggest challenge is that learning and what economy values has suddenly diverged. So what we were teaching kids for was getting into the workforce and helping, because that was a natural trajectory. You learn and then you become valuable to the economy, you serve the economy, and then you come out. But suddenly now what you're learning might not be so valuable. So then we teach how we measure learning and what students learn from them is becoming a challenge in ourselves. So when I'm also now designing courses, and just from 5 years ago when I was designing learning objectives of courses to now, and I can see that there is such a vast difference, because earlier it was more precise. Say in mathematics, it was about understanding statistics and the lower levels of the Bloom's taxonomy, where you understand, you apply, and sort of evaluate maybe. Now we're starting at evaluation. You start by evaluating the skill. You start by creating your own problems, solving real life problems, and the problem is put back to the student. And we say, how would you then integrate it into what you are doing in your life? So it's more project based. It's more outcome based. And what we are seeing is, earlier there was just one project maybe per semester. Now there's one project per course, that is almost one project in a week, where students have to go apply the skill to something that they're doing in their real life and then showcase what they learned from that. So metacognition, again, large part of it is being sourced to metacognition. What did you learn? How did you make this process? And what were the challenges you faced and how did you overcome them? So I think this metacognition came much later, at a much later stage from what I saw before, which is now integrated into grade 3, grade 4 courses. So we are trying to teach them these metacognition skills really early on, because they will need it when they are going through. Then they have a technology in hand that's giving them answers so readily, they will have to assess this. And that's what education is slowly pivoting towards.
I really like that because, as I said earlier, I don't know that I don't feel like I necessarily see that certainly at that school level. And so having this conversation is just that reminder of all the expertise that was going into formulating all of these things. And I think you've left us with, again, a really fresh insight for me personally into how actually solving a problem and doing that piece of that metacognition. What did you learn? Now coming back to it, how do you apply it? And actually that, as remembering that, is sometimes a way that we remember things much more clearly. Now, I know in my adult life, in my work life, we learn by making those mistakes and then coming back to it in a way where actually there's a lot of forced learning of knowledge when you're coming up through the education system. And it brings me back full circle where I started saying, and I often say that the knowledge bit is the easy bit now. We don't need that. Just focus on thinking. But what you've shown me is that you do need both, because we need the knowledge to then work off or to think off. And actually the problem solving piece is a way to integrate both through, if I'm understanding that correctly, and to start doing that early. And it means that we have actually more agency than we think, even as parents, almost, to say everything is that teaching moment or a learning moment. It doesn't have to come out of a textbook. So I always feel better, Noopur, when there's something optimistic that's coming out of this, because I come here and I explore these questions. One, of course, without knowing all the answers. No one has the answers at the moment, but also genuinely being very optimistic about these things. I know I'm a risk professional. I'm a lawyer. I am passionate about inclusion, and there are I do share concerns about bias and the things that we may be entrenching, but yet the train has left the station. And so reaching out and exploring how, whilst moving and in motion, we can find ways to integrate are the things that keep me going. As you know, this podcast is called Unbiased, and the ask of each of my guests at the moment, as we look to shift from judgment to curiosity, I think we necessarily should have more questions than answers. My ask of all my guests is, can you leave us with a question that you think more of us should be asking in our day-to-day lives?
Yeah, and for me, I think as a parent and an educator, I feel if AI has the answers, and in the world of AI, if humanness and personality and judgment is what is going to be more valued, how can we as parents and educators create these environments for our kids where they have more of these human interactions, where we allow them and create space for them to sit with those difficult moments before they try to comfort themselves with an answer that the algorithm comes up with. So that's our responsibility. And I feel if we can do that even in the smallest ways today, we would be contributing towards developing their voice, their opinion, and then helping them to sit with their own decisions and remember that whatever decisions they make, the consequences will be ones that they will have to face. So creating those more human-to-human connection moments.
So the question we're leaving our listeners with today, Noopur, is, as parents, as educators, as people who are responsible for developing young minds, now that the difficulty of finding an answer has gone, we need to ask ourselves to sit with uncertainty, to sit with the layer underneath the answer and our human selves. I think that does really go for all of us in a world where everything is becoming more and more accessible. In any form of discomfort gets harder and harder to do. And that is the question that we're asking, is how about if we sat with more discomfort, what value can we derive from that?
Yep.
Noopur, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your insights from such a unique set of experiences. I look forward to following your work, as I do with all my guests, and am excited to be part of a journey for so many that are in the process of curating the world that we live and operate in. So thank you,
Thank
Noopur.
you so much, Darshi. Thank you for having me. Thank you for creating this space to have these discussions. I think they're very important, and I've followed you for the last few days. I've seen the kind of questions you ask your guests. And I think they're important because if we don't ask ourselves these and we just don't learn to sit with discomfort, we can't create the space for our kids either. So we need to sit with questions more than we have answers for. So thank you so much for doing this.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. I derive so much energy from speaking to such inspiring guests and having really meaningful and challenging conversations. If you felt the same way, my ask of you is to please subscribe to this podcast, either here or wherever you download your podcast content from. Unbiased is a labour of love for me, and the impact that these perspectives have depend on reaching as many eyes and ears as possible. So your support is invaluable. Until next time, stay curious.